Hello everyone, I'm excited about today's lesson. It's going to be several days that we focus on this topic. Today will be the introductory day. So you as the student will be identifying the importance of laws being written down in the ancient world, and you'll do so by analyzing what was called Hammurabi's Code and the role that it still can play in society today. So let's first learn about who Hammurabi was before we talk about this code of his. So in the city-state of Babylon, around 1800 BCE, which is about 3,800 years ago, so just inside 4,000 years ago, so it's ancient stuff, the city-state of Babylon was very strong. And what was so strong about it wasn't just its walls for protection, but its government. It had a powerful government that ruled this city-state of Babylon. And the boss man was the king. And so your vocab word is a monarch. Monarch just means a king. Could be a queen as well, but in the ancient world, and especially in Sumer, we have generally all male leaders, male monarchs, which are kings. And so his name was Hammurabi. And that's why we'll eventually get to Hammurabi's Code. Hammurabi was the rock star of Babylon. He ruled for over 40 years. He was a great military leader, but it wasn't just his ability. I mean, a leader's not great because of their ability to win battles. A leader is a great leader because they have an ability to rule and to lead their people and to keep order. And that's what Hammurabi is most remembered for. So Hammurabi conquered all of Mesopotamia from his city-state of Babylon. And then once he had conquered Mesopotamia, remember Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers, the Tigris, Euphrates, but he didn't just conquer the land in between. He conquered all of the land in this region. And then he ruled it with very strong laws, and those laws were is what he's famous for. His most famous, he is most famous not for the battles he won or for being the ruler for over 40 years of a city-state and for the conquering. Again, he is most famous for this code of laws. So we call it Hammurabi's Code. Okay, and so this is actually a photograph of King Hammurabi. It's a photograph of stonework on the side of a temple from an ancient Sumerian palace, I believe. And so you're looking right now at look at the incredible detail of the beard, of the hair, of the things he's wearing in his head, the crown, you have his eyes, here you have his hand, his jewelry on his wrist, his bracelet, whatever he's wearing here, a sash, and the ripples of the cloth. I mean, this is really, really, really fine Sumerian artwork. And it was important to demonstrate Hammurabi and his importance. That's why this is such a beautiful piece of leftover art. And to give you an idea of where Hammurabi ruled, this up here is the canal. But other than the green that you see around that, this would be the land that had to be irrigated if it was going to be farmed. And this is ancient Sumerian, foundations of buildings. And of course, this isn't an ancient photograph. They didn't have photographs back then, so you still have a truck and you have a modern road here. But it's a very dry region. He ruled in mostly in the desert, and the reason it wasn't all desert and life could be there at all was the irrigation provided by these canals and the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. That's the area of Mesopotamia. So let's get into it. The next vocab word for you is codify, or to codify laws. Codified laws, code, written down. It means written laws and the associated punishments. So these written laws, these codified laws being written down, this is the first time that we know of in human history, and I say that because there could always have been another society that had laws written down before this, but we don't have the evidence, the archaeological or written evidence that we found. So this codified laws, this is the first time that we, as historians, believe that we have direct evidence that laws were finally written down. Before laws were written down, they could change. The king could change his mind day to day, minute to minute if he wanted to. And then the issue with that is people would not be made aware of these changes or what was expected of them. And this means that people were more likely to break laws by accident, but also to manipulate that and say, like, hey, I didn't know what the rules were. You changed them, you changed your mind on something, and I live, I don't live right next to the king in the palace, so I didn't know what the rules were. But unfortunately, if the king says you broke a law and you get, like, the death penalty or something like that, or a really harsh consequence, then, you can say, I didn't know what it was, and he can say, too bad, I just decided this. So writing laws down was really actually a good thing. It protected people much better. This way, all over the city-state of Babylon that he ruled, and eventually Babylon became an empire because he conquered all of Mesopotamia, people all over Hammurabi's Babylonian empire now knew exactly what was against the law. They knew exactly what was expected of them, what behavior they were expected to exhibit, and how they were supposed to live their daily lives. Laws exist for society to be able to function peacefully and for everyone to know what is expected of them. And that's just like we have speed limits, so you are driving safely, and if you're over those speed limits, you can get pulled over and get a ticket, and that's supposed to keep people in line so that you're not driving 80 miles an hour down a side road and, killing someone or killing yourself in a car accident. And driving unnecessarily. It's so that everyone knows what's expected, because if you don't have rules and laws, and of course associated punishments, and some of Hammurabi's punishments that we'll discuss next week were very harsh, but he saw fit to have these harsh punishments because it ensured that people would follow the rules, and then he had a peaceful society. So as a vocabulary word, Hammurabi's Code is a set of 282 laws. That's a lot of rules to have to follow, but this is how specific and how organized his government was in the way he wanted people to peacefully live their lives. Hammurabi's Code is a set of 282 laws that dealt with almost every part of public and private daily life in ancient Sumer. There were laws and rules that had to do with trade, to make sure trade was fair, with loans and debt. Debt is if you're owing money, and loans means that you borrow money from someone else, maybe the king, maybe someone wealthy. There were rules about how to pay it back, when to pay it back, how much could be loaned, and what would happen if you owed money, what the consequence would be. There were laws on stealing and theft. If someone stole something, and it wouldn't just be like, say you're sorry and give it back, and we'll talk next week about those. There's a reason why I made this slide red, actually. There were rules for what would happen if you took a life, if you murdered someone. That was extremely serious back then as well as today. There were also very specific rules on if you injured somebody. And something very interesting that we'll examine and unpack next week about Hammurabi's Code is that it was not fair. There was not a fair consequence or punishment depending on the amount of wealth that you had. And that's something that we'll really be looking closely at. So trade, loans and owing money, theft, stealing, murder, if you injure someone, and many other things as well. And so Hammurabi's Code is a code of rules that set down what was expected, the rules for both criminal and civil law. So civil law is like how you function in society, which means, trade and loans and things like that. And then criminal law is breaking the law, and murdering or hurting somebody. And so today, next week we'll actually get into examining those laws, what those laws were, what those punishments were. We will go a lot more in depth with this. Today, as I said in the beginning of the lesson, we're going to examine the impact law in general has today on society. Some of the ideas of Hammurabi's Code are still found in laws around the world today, including in the United States of America. That right there is something that should make you open your eyes and say, wow, 3,800 years ago, a king thought so honestly and so hard, put so much energy into fairness in laws, and of course in some ways unfairness as well, that we'll examine, that we'll talk about. But he thought 282 things had to have explicit laws and specific punishments. And some of those things are still the basis of rules that are found in the laws around the planet today. It's really cool. It really speaks to the impact that Hammurabi had. He didn't just rule Babylon, the city-state and the empire, for 42 years, which is a very long time. But the impact that he left on society as a whole has lasted for nearly 4,000 years. That is why we spend so much time learning about this man, this monarch, this King Hammurabi. All modern societies today write down and record. I don't mean like a recording like I'm doing right now. I mean write down, like written record, their laws for all citizens. And to bring this down to you guys, obviously you know that there is a code of conduct in the United States. There are laws on top of laws. I mean, like I said, everything from speed limits and not running red lights and stop signs, all the way to paying your taxes on time. There are penalties for that. Staying on the right side of the road. A lot of it has to do with driving, and those are my examples because those are the examples that you guys can see every day. But this goes right down to the exact reason why there is a student handbook, and now it's online. But there's a student handbook with rules and expectations and the consequences for breaking those rules here at Keith Middle School. A student's going to tell me, I didn't know I had to raise my hand to talk in class. Well, it's a classroom policy, it's a Keith Middle School policy, and if you do it more than once, there can be a consequence for that, and it's written down. Miss Russo is your assistant principal, and if you end up going to her office, she's going to tell you exactly what you did, and then she's going to tell you on the page, in the sentence, in the number of that rule that you broke, and then she'll tell you what the consequence is, and she doesn't even have to open that handbook anymore. She knows it by heart because that's her job. So that's a direct impact of Hammurabi's code in writing things down. Codifying this law directly impacts you guys here at Keith Middle School. And if you go to the movies or to the mall, there are signs up that tell you how to act, how to behave, and that's codified law, guys. That's what that is. That's an impact that exists. It goes directly back to Hammurabi writing down the codes for his people.